Today we're painting a beautiful nautical landscape, step by step and perfect for beginners. Let's go. All right, so the first step is I've added a piece of masking tape on my canvas about a third of the way down, and this is gonna separate our sky from our water. And then next we're gonna work on a beautiful suspended sky. So to start out with, we're gonna mix a light blue. So this is ultramarine blue. And I'm gonna add in about double or triple the amount of white to get a really beautiful light blue. And then I'm gonna add, because I wanna mute it just a little bit, I'm gonna add a tiny bit of black. Like I'm gonna grab black, I'll show you, like on the tip of my brush, and then add that in, because black can be very overpowering very fast. So I like to add just tiny bits. So I'm trying to match the color I have here, and that's gonna dry darker, so that's perfect. All right, so now what we're gonna do is we're gonna take our largest wide brush, because we want really big and bold strokes, and we're going to sweep it down like that on one side, and then we're gonna do the other on the other side, kind of shaping a U shape, because the sky is gonna be sweeping downwards. And then we're gonna create a few other swoops down here. And here we can do kind of like crisscross pattern, just to get that similar shape going. And then I'm gonna add a smaller one down here and a smaller one down here. Okay, so now what we're gonna do is we're gonna clean off our brush. We don't want any paint on that. And then when it's nice and clean, we're gonna dry it off. So we do not want a wet brush. We want as dry a brush as you can get. Just like that. Just dry it off on a paper towel or napkin. And then we're gonna pick up some white on our brush. We don't want too much, but we want it on the tip of our bristles. And now what we're gonna do is, keeping with that same movement of our sky, it's suspended and it's kind of a U shape, we're gonna fill in those blanks. So wherever we didn't have the blue, we're gonna fill that in with some white. And what's gonna happen is that white is gonna blend with that blue below, which is good. But we don't want it too blended. So we want those streaks to kind of still be poking through. So just try to get kind of like a streaky look here. And we don't want to cover all of that blue below. We want those lines to show through at the end of our painting. So keep that in mind as well. And you can also, actually, if you want, you can actually wait for the blue to dry before you do the step. That gives a really interesting look as well. And then I'm just gonna create some extra big strokes here at the top, just to give the illusion that there's some clouds happening there. And then in the middle, I like to kind of cluster them. So I like to take my white and kind of create this movement in the sky at the center, so it looks like the sky is kind of blossoming from the center of that sky, and then moving it kind of like that. And don't worry too much if your clouds look a little boxy or like straight edged. We're gonna come back in a later step and soften them out. For now, you want those edgy kind of brush strokes. You don't want anything too blended. And then I like to add a little bit of white at the bottom over here, because we're gonna bring in some yellow paint. The white is gonna blend really nicely with that yellow, so I'm gonna add extra white over here. Okay. So talking about yellow, we're gonna add some yellow hues on our palette. Now I was playing around with lots of yellows for the past couple of days, just to get that kind of sunset glow at the bottom of our sky just right. And I found this combination of yellow ochre and Hansa yellow to give that like most perfect light glow. So I'm going to add both of those on my palette And again, we're gonna clean off our brush as best as we can. Actually, you know what? We are going to switch over to another brush. So I have a smaller flat brush over here. So we're gonna be using that one because there's smaller strokes at the bottom. So the combination I found worked really well for that glow is using equal amounts of Hansa yellow and equal amounts of yellow ochre. So you know how they call the sunset the golden hour, where like everything just glows with that beautiful golden hue? This color, this combination with Hansa yellow and yellow ochre really creates that golden hour kind of vibe. And then what we're gonna do to start things off with our sunlight is just we're gonna create a line right across the bottom. And this is why the masking tape really comes in handy here, because you don't have to worry about making that perfect line. Now, once you have that line, we're going to go with that same movement and create these kind of swoops starting in the center and going upwards with that mixture. Like that. And you don't want to fill all of it in. You can leave some gaps of it without any paint, because we're going to come back and pick up some pure yellow Hansa and we're just going to fill them in. All those little gaps. That same kind of moving, suspended sky. Like that. And then we're gonna blend a bit now. So I'm cleaning off that same brush I just used. You want it nice and clean and dry. Okay, so nice and clean and dry. And then we're just gonna blend out the top portion where the blue sky and that white paint meet that yellow sky, just to give it like a natural gradient. And then we're gonna do the same thing on this side. And you can kind of use these like circular brush strokes because that kind of mimics the shape of clouds. And then also you're gonna take whatever paint you have on your brush and you're gonna add some of that yellow paint a little bit into that blue, because you're gonna see a little bit of that yellow glow from the sun throughout the sky, not just at the bottom. It's gonna be poking through here and there. And then I'm gonna add a little bit here in this cluster of clouds, just to give a nice glow. Okay. So now I'm gonna pick up a little bit more white and I'm gonna add a little bit more white to blend that area between the blue and the yellow. And I do the same thing on the side. So a little bit of extra white to blend the section between the blue and the yellow. And we wanna keep that movement going kind of suspended. And here you can keep it a little chunky too, the brush strokes. It's nice to see some of those brush strokes at the end of the painting. It's a really nice painterly look. Okay, perfect. So now what we're going to do is I'm gonna pick up a little bit more of that white and we're gonna add a few brush strokes that are kind of angled downwards. That's just going to give us a little bit more dimension in our sky. And since the paint is still kind of wet, it's going to blend a bit. But that's okay. And then we're going to bring it towards the center. Add a little bit of yellow there. Okay. Perfect. Add a little bit more white. So now what we're gonna do is we're going to switch over to a small detailing brush and we're going to add in, these are like kind of like the shadow clouds of a sunset. So they're a little bit darker than the original yellow. So to get that, we're just gonna basically pick up some pure yellow ochre. This color actually works perfectly for that, for those shadows. So you wanna thin down your paint just a little, just so it's nice and fluid on your small detailing brush. And then you're gonna start in the center and you're gonna create these swoops out, just like that. And you can see already how it's giving that beautiful dimension. And we're going to keep with that movement of that sky, kind of forming kind of like a U shape. And if you find your paint is still wet and you're not able to get like a nice stroke on there, I would just wait for your paint to dry and then paint these strokes over top. So they're going to become a little bit more sparse as we move away from the center. So we want to focus most of these tiny strokes in the center where that sun is kind of glowing from below. And then we want them a little bit less, a little bit more sparse as we move away from the center. And also remember too that in the next few steps, we're gonna be covering a lot of the sky, like on both of the sides with trees. So you don't have to put too much detail on the sides. All right, while our paint is still wet, I'm gonna show you how to soften any harsh edges of your clouds. So for example, here, it's like a straight line, and I just wanna kind of soften it out a bit. So I'm just going to use my, like a small round brush, and I'm just going to use these circular strokes to kind of blend out any harsh edges that might be bugging you. But keep in mind also that in skies, sometimes some cloud patterns will actually be kind of more streaky. So that works, so that actually looks quite natural too. And then I'm gonna pick up some white paint and I'm just gonna add a few streaks like that, just to give extra. An extra feature, an extra pop of color. And then I'm gonna just fix up some of this yellow. Was a little bit too yellow, so I'm just going to cover it a little bit with some white. So here is just adding these are kind of like impressionistic clouds. So they're not perfect. They're kind of giving us the illusion overall that they're clouds. So you can kind of have fun here. And I like to also hold my paintbrush a little bit higher up because I don't want to have a lot of control here. I kind of want to be more random, because the more random things are, the better it looks. For some reason in art, this is like a fact. So more random, the better. So I'm trying to avoid too much control here. Just adding a little bit more detail. Some of these clouds. Random places. Okay, and then maybe I will add, I'm gonna see how it looks. So I'm gonna add a few streaks of white to this middle portion and see if I like it. Not too many, just a few here and there. Just to accentuate the fact that there's the brightest part of the painting is like right here in the center. I think that's all right. Okay, perfect. All right, so once you're happy with your clouds, you can let that dry fully, and then we're gonna paint our water at the bottom. I just want to quickly mention that I added some light blue marks that are kind of swooping down into some of that white that was between the yellow and the blue, just to give a little bit more of a graduation between the blue and the yellow. So I just wanted to mention that. Now the next step, once your sky is completely dry, you want it to be like super, super dry, because we're going to be adding our tape on the top portion. So we can focus on our water and we don't have to worry about our sky getting all mucked up. There we go. And to note also that I painted the sides as well. Okay. Now for the water, we're going to start with a lighter blue. Again, much like the sky. So I'm going to grab a little bit of blue on my palette. I'm going to add just a dollop of that black just to mute it, and then some white. Add a lot more white to my palette here. I actually picked up some white on sale at Michael's the other day, so I was super excited. It was buy 3, get 1 free. So I scooped up 3 titanium white paints. Okay, so you want it to be very similar to that initial sky color. Then I'm grabbing my largest flat brush, and I'm going to try not to get too much paint on it, and I'm just going to add that blue right at the horizon. And with landscapes, things that are further away from our eyes, like at the horizon, it's always lighter and more muted in color compared to things like at the foreground or closer to your eye. So we're going to be painting light to dark for the ocean or the water. This could be a lake as well. Lake or ocean. So painting the sides too. And then I'm going to add a couple of strokes here and there of that light blue paint. And then we're going to mix it, we're going to make it darker. So I'm going to add a small amount of black into the mix to make it a little bit darker. Black and a little bit of blue. You want it to be noticeably darker than that one. Okay, so then we're going to add, yeah, that's noticeably darker. And then we're going to kind of fill it in. And then I'm going to keep on doing that. I'm going to keep on darkening this blue as we move our way to the front. And I'm also leaving white spaces in between my strokes too, because we're going to come in and blend all that in a later step. A little bit more blue. There we go. Nice and dark at the front. Add a little bit of black in there because I want some nice dark hues in there to give us contrast. Okay. Okay, so now we're going to grab our smaller flat brush that's nice and clean and dry, and we're going to pick up some pure white on it. And what we're going to do while this paint is still wet is we're going to come in between all those places that we left with white, and we're going to blend all those different variations of blue with each other with these back and forth strokes. I'm being really light with my paintbrush too. I'm not pressing down. And I'm kind of switching between the chiseled edge and the flat edge. So sometimes I'm kind of going like that to get some blends, and sometimes I'm going like that just to get some waves or watermarks in there too. And you want to work pretty fast here because you don't want that paint to dry. All those blues below, you don't want those to dry on you, because then it's going to be really super hard to blend. Blending dried paint is not fun. It's a struggle. So let's try to do our best to blend while it's still workable. So as long as your ocean looks lighter at the top and then a little bit darker at the bottom, then you'll get the perspective correctly. And if you don't, that's the beauty with acrylic, you can always layer on top. So for example, if I found that blue at the top a little bit too light, I would just come and lighten it with a little bit of white, just like that. Okay, so once you're happy with your water, we're gonna let that dry. All right, so the next step is once everything is dried, we're going to paint in a small sun right in the middle near the horizon. So I'm just grabbing a button here because it's nice and round and I can trace it, but you can use anything you have lying around your home that's small and round. And then we're just gonna center it as best we can in the middle of our painting. And then I'm just gonna trace it with a pencil to outline it first, and then we're gonna fill it in. I almost didn't add in the sun, but then I asked my daughter and she's like, yeah, add in the sun. Why wouldn't you? That's what she said actually. Why wouldn't you add in the sun? Like, very good point. There we go. So now I'm just gonna take my small detailing brush and I'm gonna pick up some pure white paint. And we're just gonna fill in that circle. Easy peasy. It makes it so much easier to trace the shape before painting it in. I cannot paint a circle freehand to save my life. So I rely on tracing. Perfect. So now what we're gonna do is we're gonna add a little bit of detail, more detail in our water. For that, I like to use a really small flat brush. So you can see there, it's really small and it's flat. So it's gonna give me a nice edge to make more details in my water. So to begin with, we're gonna pick up some white on that brush. And then we're gonna paint in water reflection lines for our sun. So in terms of landscapes and perspective, the lines, the reflection lines that are further away from our eye, so more closer to the horizon, are gonna be smaller and thinner. And then they're gonna get a little bit bigger and thicker as you move away from the horizon. So just keep that in mind. And you can always layer too. If you find your white is not really popping on the first layer, just wait for it to dry and then go over it with a little bit more white. Titanium white is, from what I believe, it's the most opaque white. But even sometimes when you use a titanium white, you still have to do a few layers to make it pop. You know what? Let's try adding in yellow. That really pale, pale, pale yellow. Let's add that in the water to see how that changes things. That might give us a little bit more, give us a little bit more contrast beside the blue. It's gonna give us a beautiful glow too. Oh, that looks super nice. Sometimes when you're painting, things just kind of flow out of you. This was a little bit unplanned, but we're gonna go with it. You might not be able to see it on camera, but that yellow really, really contrasts beautifully against that blue. Okay, perfect. All right, so the next step is we're gonna add some land and some beautiful trees to our landscape. So to begin that, we're going to use our medium flat brush and some burnt umber or any brown you have on hand. And we're gonna start right about here. So it's kind of like a triangle shape with some lumps and bumps going all the way up. And we're just going to paint that in. It actually doesn't matter to keep your paint strokes smooth here. We actually do want, like in the sky, we want some texture from our paint strokes. So try to keep them nice and painterly. And if you're painting the sides, then you can continue your painting or your rock or landmass right onto the side of your painting. I find finishing your painting while you're doing it instead of waiting till it's done is much easier. And it gives it a really cool look because it's kind of like a painting on the side and on the front. Kind of like 3D if you're hanging it on a wall. All right, and now just gonna round that out. Okay, so we're gonna repeat that on the other side. When I was thinking of this composition, I was thinking of the Thousand Islands. I live in Ontario, and it's actually the Thousand Islands borders between Canada and the States, and it's a marvelous place. It's actually quite amazing how many islands exist in that small waterway. So this is the inspiration behind this painting, is the Thousand Islands area. All right, so now once we have these two big islands done, we're gonna paint in these small rock shapes. So they're little pieces of rock or land that's kind of poking through the water, kind of forming a little bay area right over here. So you're gonna paint each of these little rocks a different size. So one's gonna be the biggest. So that one there, be the biggest one. This is gonna be the medium-sized one. And that's gonna be the smallest one. It's really, it's always a good idea in paintings, landscapes or any paintings for that matter, to give a variety of shapes and also in different planes. So you can notice here where I didn't paint these rocks in a straight line or in the same plane. I kind of staggered them. So all of them are kind of in its own plane there, which makes it more interesting. All right, now what we're gonna do is we're gonna add a little bit of depth and texture to these little islands over here. We need a little bit of yellow ochre because that sun is shining down. So the sun is reflecting down right at the tops of these islands over here. So we want to give that illusion too. So to give that illusion, we're going to grab a little bit of yellow ochre, a little bit of brown. I would say 1 part brown, 1 part yellow ochre to start out with. To give it a really nice, beautiful golden brown color. And then we're going to paint these kind of painterly strokes all the way down the top portion of our island. It's not like a straight line like that. It's more these paint strokes that are going in different directions all the way down. And that's gonna give the illusion that there's kind of like rock or uneven land on these islands. And then we're gonna take that same warm brown and we're gonna create these tiny little strokes on these little guys over here. Now, if you're finding it difficult to use the bigger brush, you can switch over to a small one to make it a little bit easier. Okay, so now we got that golden kiss tinge at the top. We're going to create a lighter brown to give these islands a little bit more texture. So I'm gonna grab 1 part brown and a little bit of white. So I'd say 2 parts brown, 1 part's white to create kind of like a chocolate milk color. can imagine chocolate milk. That's the color we're going for. And then once you have that beautiful chocolatey color, we're gonna paint those kind of same painterly strokes in the middle of this island. And we wanna make sure we don't cover all that dark brown below, because that's gonna give us a little bit more dimension and interest. It's gonna give us the illusion that there's some rocks that are kind of hidden below these ones here. There's a little bit of shadow happening. You can even bring some of that light brown into that golden color above. All right, we're also going to take that light brown and add some light brown strokes on these mini guys here. And then we're going to make an even lighter brown by adding a little bit more white into our medium brown mix. And we're gonna add some more strokes at the bottom here. And we're gonna leave the bottom of this island dark brown, because that's at the shore. We're gonna repeat that here, this one. And it's gonna overlap a little bit with that medium brown, and that's totally fine. Okay, and now I'm going to add a little bit more of that dark brown in certain areas, just to give a little bit more depth, because I covered it up too much. So if you can just imagine that there's some rocks here on the edge, and kind of make rock shapes like triangles. And I'm gonna just keep on layering here until I'm happy. So I'm gonna add a little bit more of that lighter brown in certain areas. So this part there's no real science to it. It's just kind of adding light, dark, and medium brown colors in random areas. Like we mentioned at the beginning of this video with art, the more random, the better it turns out. So sometimes it's good not to even think about it and just kind of go with the flow until you're happy. You can even add a little touch of white to some areas too while the paint is wet, because that's going to make it not so white. It's gonna blend right into that brown. I am pretty happy with that. So now what we're gonna do is we're gonna move on to the trees. So I'm gonna switch brushes here. I'm going to use a small detailing brush. So it's like a round detailing brush here. And I'm gonna take some of that burnt umber or brown paint, and we're gonna create our tree stumps to begin with. And it also helps when you're making really thin lines to thin down your paint just a little bit. So I like to add some water into my paint to make it kind of like a soupy, like a thick soup or gravy consistency. And that way it makes it easier to make those fine lines. And also you don't want too much paint on your brush as well. Oops. And also be careful that I got some paint on my hand. So this guy here is still wet, so you have to make sure that you don't smudge your paint, or you can even just wait till it dries. Okay, so now for the evergreen tree part, I'm going to add some Hooker's Green Permanent onto my palette, or you can choose any green. And we're gonna darken it, because with this tree we're gonna work in layers, and we want the darkest layer at the bottom. So I'm just grabbing, oh, you know what? I'm gonna move this over here so you guys can see it. So I'm going to grab some of that green, and then I'm gonna add a little bit of black to it, because we want a nice dark green. We want to desaturate it, because right now it's super bright. It's beautiful, but for the shadows are often a nice and muted color. That's a nice little trick with colors. If you want to desaturate it, make it more muted, you can add a little bit of black, gray, or even white. So in terms of brushes, we're going to use a small round brush. It's not quite a detailing brush. It's more of like a small brush like that. Okay, so we're gonna start at the top of the tree. Now for evergreen trees, this is my style of how I like to paint them in with the round brush. So the top of a tree is gonna have just a couple of really thin branches like that. So they're really sparse at the top of the tree. But as you move your way down, they're gonna get a little bit longer and a little bit thicker. And another thing to note here too is that I'm staggering the sides. So I do this side over here, and then when I'm gonna do the right side, I'm not gonna add them on the same plane. I'm gonna go about, I'm gonna move a little bit down and then do that stroke. So they're nice and staggered. Like that. And the other thing to note is that some of the branches can actually be smaller. Even though the tree actually ends up getting wider at the bottom, there's some branches that are in between that are actually shorter, and that gives more of a natural look. So I'm gonna be mindful here and make some that are kind of getting bigger, but also I'm going to keep some small ones too. And the angle as well. So some are gonna have more of an angle to them like that, and then some can kind of come out like that. Because trees in nature are not symmetrical. So actually that's the key here, is to make sure that when you're painting in your branches, they are not symmetrical. You want to kind of go random. And then eventually it's just gonna fill out. So these trees, a lot of people use the fan brush to make pine trees and evergreen trees, and that works really well. But I find using the fan brush a little challenging sometimes, especially as a beginner. So this way of painting in your trees, I find it's a little bit more forgiving. And then you also get the hang of creating randomness because you're actually focused on making things random. At the bottom of the tree, I kind of like to fan it out a bit. So I'll make some of these strokes kind of look like it's going around the tree. And then I'll come back and I'll make some of them a little bit longer. And you can also fill some out. Once you have the rough shape, then it's much easier to then play with the overall shape of it. So now I'm going to do the same thing with my next tree. So the reason I'm not finishing this tree in one shot is because I don't want my paints to dry out when doing all of my trees. If they dry out, then mixing the exact same paint color is kind of tricky, and then they're gonna all look kind of different. So I do all of my trees first, and then I'm going to lighten them up and give them dimension in the later step. All right, now that the base coat for all of our trees are done, we're gonna actually thicken the stump of our tree. These trees are not fully full. They're a little bit sparse, and we're gonna see some of that trunk throughout. I bring it down onto this island, like that. And then we're gonna do that for all of the trees here. It doesn't have to be all the way up, and just here and there. Okay, perfect. So now what we're gonna do is we're gonna add a little bit of a highlight to our trunk before we continue on with our tree. So I'm gonna switch over my brush to the small detailing one. And I'm gonna pick up some white paint on it, just a tiny bit. And while our brown is wet, we're gonna add a highlight on the right side of our trunk, because the sun is kind of shining out towards the left for this side and the right for this side. So we're going to keep that in mind when we're painting in our light reflection on our trunk. And some of this trunk is going to get hidden again after we do the second coat on our tree. So if you've brought a little bit too much trunk into your tree, we're going to fix that right up. And then on this side, the highlight is gonna be on the left side of the trunk. Added a little bit too much of that white, so I'm just taking a Q-tip here. While the paint is wet, you can remove your paint. Fix it right up, which is awesome. So I make lots of mistakes, so I keep lots of Q-tips handy. And I don't use them to clean my ears. They're purely for fixing my paint mistakes. And for painting. You can paint some pretty amazing things with Q-tips. You can take a look on my channel. I have a few tutorials on painting with Q-tips. All right, so now that we have our trunk that's poking out, we're going to add our second layer to the tree. And this step is really gonna bring our trees to life. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna create a lighter version of this green. But we're gonna add a little bit of that yellow ochre to it because we want it to be a nice warm green, because some of that sun is hitting down on the needles and the branches. So we want to bring some of that yellow warmth right into our branches. And then I'm going to bring just a little bit of white, not too much, because we want to reserve the lightest green for the last step. Then we're going to use that same brush we used for painting the trees in the first place. So it's our medium round brush. And we're going to pick up that green color. And here, we're going to paint right over top of that dark color, but we want to make sure that we do not cover all of that dark area, because that dark area is going to give us shadow and we want to keep that shadow. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to paint this green right on top of each one, but I'm being mindful here to keep that dark green below too. And you can also paint over some of that stump here. And when you cover some of that trunk, it looks really cool. It looks like that trunk is kind of hiding behind those branches, which gives it a really cool detail. And we're going to repeat that on all of the trees because we want to use that same green. We want to make sure that doesn't dry out on us. Alrighty, so now what we're going to do is we're going to create our lightest green for the highlight. And so for that, we're going to make it even lighter by adding a little bit of white. And so it should be much different than that green we have right there. So there should be contrast between this green and that medium one. And here we're going to do the same thing. We're layering on top, but here we want to make sure we don't cover that medium green and that darker green. So these highlights are going to be really small. And if you find your paint is blending a little bit too much, then you can wait for your layer to dry even more. We don't want our layers to blend here. We want all those three colors to be there in the final painting. So Make sure that your layers are dry below. And that really just pops. So now what I like to do before we finish the trees is I pick up a little bit of brown on my paintbrush. And with these evergreen trees, or evergreen or pine trees, they often have a point at the top. Oops, it's a little bit too watery. Where there's no branches that are sticking out. So it's just basically a part of the trunk that just goes straight up. A fine line like that. So now we're going to move on to adding some water that's splashing and crashing against these islands, because right now it just looks like it's really kind of flat. And on this day there's lots of wind happening, there's lots of waves in the water, so we want to capture some waves that are crashing on the shore. So I've picked up a little bit of white on my medium round brush and just going to start creating these like circular brush strokes along that shore. And it doesn't have to be along the full shore. It could be, some could have no splash marks or crash marks. And then we're going to create some here, crashing against these small guys. Kind of tapering off. And you want very little white paint on your brush when you do this. You want it to kind of go on a little bit transparent. All right, so the next step is we're gonna paint in a silhouette of a sailboat. So to do that, I have my detailing brush that's loaded with some thinned down black paint. And I'm just going to start painting that in. The sailboat is sailing off into the distance and it's enjoying a beautiful sunset. Whoever's on this boat is really living life. Now, if you're looking for another easy painting idea, then you want to check out this mountain landscape painting tutorial.